Last year, I started law school in Los Angeles. I have never lived in a big city before, and I was really excited to be in a massive city with over 4 million people. And ever since I was little, I always knew that I had a half-sister in Los Angeles, but my parents had this weird anger toward her that always made it feel sort of like a taboo topic. Of course, I looked her up on social media and I knew what she looked like, but that was about all. We had never actually met, and she was never that active on social media, so there wasn't a lot that I could see. Out of nowhere, one day in my first year of law school, I got a friend request on Facebook from my sister. Her profile seemed legitimate, and she had Facebook friends, and her profile picture looked like her. She sent me a message inviting me to a little dinner party at this park with her friends. We could finally meet each other for the first time. I was new to LA, still am, and I had no idea which parts of the city to avoid at night. I was so excited about that idea, but I had a lot of anxiety about it too. It would be nice if we met and totally clicked and became besties for life. But what if we ended up sobbing like we were in some dramatic movie scene? What if I tried to talk with her and she just didn't click with me and she started showing me an attitude? Or worse, what if it's all going well until we have some kind of disagreement, someone said something hurtful, and then we both began crying in front of everyone? Honestly, if she suggested a cozy little bakery for desserts instead, I would have gone. But going to a park with other people didn't feel right. I thought it was like such a precious moment that I didn't want to have in front of all these other people. I couldn't bring myself to go, and I didn't want to risk having a meltdown in front of other people. I was worried about how messy it could get. A few weeks later, I Googled that park just to see what it was like. Maybe we could meet up there together, just one-on-one. And that's when I learned something was wrong. Now, I won't say the name of the park, but anyone who's lived in Los Angeles for long will tell you that it's not a safe place for girls to be having a dinner party, especially at night. The area surrounding that park has very high violent crime rates. It's controlled by gangs. Even people who do illegal business in that park are forced to pay a tax to the gang in exchange for being left alone. And so now I was really concerned and curious. I actually tried to get a hold of my sister myself. She was an undergrad at the time, a local college. I had a friend who went to her school, and I asked my friend to reach out on her campus and ask her if she'd be okay with meeting us. They connected, and the three of us met at my friend's house. It was great. We got along so well, and my friend was also very happy to do that for us, and the three of us had so much fun. And we weren't bursting into tears, but we let out a few, and we had dinner, we watched a movie, and we spent the night at my friend's house. When I told my sister about that whole thing, she said that she hadn't used Facebook since high school. So clearly, someone was impersonating her. I would have told her to report the fake account, but apparently it had already been deleted. She knew that she had been impersonated on social media, though. Another one of her friends had been scammed by someone pretending to be her, and it was some scheme involving fake concert tickets or something like that. Someone had been impersonating my sister. They knew that I was in town, and they literally tried to lure me into one of the most dangerous parts of LA at night. I have no idea what their motives were, and I don't even know if I want to find out. Meeting my sister after all these years was a beautiful thing, but the whole backdrop was terrifying. When I was 16 years old, I'm a female, I was walking to a store near my house. I was a huge pothead and would walk to the neighborhood nearby to get my stuff and then take a shortcut through said neighborhood to the store to get blunt wraps. I was walking through an abandoned apartment building, and a very nice-dressed man was walking through and asked how I was doing. I ignored him and just kept walking. In the area that I was walking, there's not really white men in suits, so I was kind of thrown off. I get to the store and I'm walking back, and a white truck is parked in the corner of the apartment building, so I opted to go the long way on the busy street. The truck drove up to me, and the same man jumped out and picked me up so fast that I didn't even have time to think. I was only 100 pounds at the time and wasn't nearly as strong as him. I tried to scream and hit him with my elbow, but there was no luck. A lady that's heavily on drugs that always walks around my city came running at us and yelling to put me down. He actually did put me down and then sped off. Almost 10 years later, I always stopped to give the woman food and actually just paid her to get rehab, and I guess now she's doing great, reunited with her grandchildren and working. Not as creepy as some of these other stories here, but definitely never walking alone again after that. Little backstory before we begin. I'm into LARPing. And for those who don't know what that is, we basically spend the weekend in the woods dressed as medieval fantasy characters and interact with each other. I go to these events with my friend and my partner, and we meet some more friends when we're there. There are all types of people at these events, but 99.9% are absolute angels. I had yet to meet the 0.1%, but wish I hadn't. And before the event started, a guy, Greg, swung by my tent while I was setting it up. My partner and friend were setting up the secondary tent up a path and couldn't see me. There were 5 other people to my right, and I had never met the guy before, but as soon as he said hi, I had a bad feeling. He was maybe around 5'10", obese, a neck beard, basically what would fit the description of what you might call an incel. He approaches me and asks me if I'm here alone, and I say no. I'm here with people, but don't mention my partner or friend directly. He asks me if I'm a gamer, to which I say yes, and from then on, he starts rambling on about Ark Survival, which is a game that I personally have like 3,000 plus hours on. He tells me blatantly wrong info, misnames the dinosaurs, tells me stuff that's impossible to do in the game, even with mods, etc. And every time I correct him, I can see that he looks to be getting even more annoyed. I end the conversation, saying I have to go back to setting up the tent, and he leaves. Now fast forward to around 10 to 11 p.m., the event has started, which means that any mention of the real world, such as cars, TV, pop culture, etc., is forbidden by a rule called decorum. We're playing a campfire game with my friends and my partner, and the guy comes by to sit with us. He sits next to me, I move over. He scoots closer, I move over, and he scoots. Eventually, I get up and sit next to my friend. As we play the game, he keeps referring to the real world and to video games, so we tell him either to leave or to make an effort and speak properly, and he leaves. The next day, I go up a trail for fake hunting, gathering resources. As I head back down towards the village, in the middle of the woods with no camps to hide in, he's there, waiting for me on the trail. He asks if I'd like to go get coffee or something sometime, to which I respond, no thanks. As we continue down the trail, I tell him I need to collect plants for my potions, and if he'll excuse me, I'll be going back to my village to drop off my bow and grab my basket. I start walking quickly, but he follows me, grabs my arm, and says, I could come with you. You, me, alone in the woods looking for plants? It sounds like the perfect scenario. I freaked out and rushed down the trail toward the village. When my neighbors see me, they look very concerned. They ask if I need help, and I tell them, in all honesty, which is our code for saying, take me seriously, this isn't part of the game. This guy is being creepy and following me. And they grab their weapons, foam weapons, and tell him to back off before they carve him a new one. I stay with them for a few minutes before calming down and hanging out with my friends. Night falls and we're having fun with various fights and encounters happening. At around midnight, I decided to go to the bathroom. By this point, I hadn't seen him since maybe 7 p.m. As I come back in the dark, he jumps out from a bush and pins me against a tree. He tells me he's disappointed, that I've been leading him on, and that he doesn't understand why I would hold another guy's hand and hug 3 others but not him. I tell him that I hold my fiance's hand and hug my friends, but he's neither. I also tell him to stop his nonsense, in all honesty, and he responds, but what if, in all honesty, I just want a little kiss, huh? Just a little kiss and then you can go. I yell no and try to push him away. My friends who are on the other side of a nearby bridge hear me scream, and they grab their weapons, call my neighbors, and about 10 people come rushing over to help. The guy lets me go and tries to explain to my rescuers, saying he was just interrogating me for information about the demons, our foes in this LARPing situation. And my friends who have seen him act like a jerk before tell him not to move, that they're going to get the LARP owner to deal with him. And he tries to talk them out of it, but my neighbors tell him to sit down or he'll be visiting Death's altar before he has a chance to leave. My fiancé, very worried, takes me aside to make sure I'm okay. The owner arrives and I explain everything that has happened, and the owner takes Greg out of the game for a talk. From what I heard, he was kindly told not to return to future events. Back in 2013, I lived in Providence, Rhode Island, and had moved there for a new job. It was just me living there in a quaint and spacious townhouse with my then 4-year-old daughter. We were relatively new to the area and didn't know many people, but did become familiar with a kind older gentleman who lived next door. His name, for the purpose of this story, was Ben. He lived in a connected townhouse with our 2 units abutting each other, and our street was lined with beautiful floral trees and quite nice, but Providence is weird in that the conditions of the house and little neighborhoods can vary drastically street by street. We were near a few rough neighborhoods, but I felt relatively safe in my new home. I remember a few nights prior to this specific night, I saw a Facebook post with a safety tip to put your car keys next to your bed so if anything ever happens, you can press the alarm and scare an intruder off. I've never been overly concerned about my safety and rarely took advantage of any tips I saw on Facebook, so I'm not sure how or why I suddenly decided to heed this advice. I was reading a book in bed with my light on in my second-floor bedroom, hours after putting my daughter to sleep, when I heard a loud sound outside. I peered out the window to take a look and saw nothing. I had taken some melatonin that evening, turning off the light, and went to sleep. It was maybe a half hour later or so when I was suddenly woken up by what felt like almost an earthquake. The room shook and I heard a loud thud. Half awake, I gasped and sat up wondering if it was my imagination or if I actually felt something, and immediately ran to my daughter's room thinking that she had fallen off her bed or injured herself or something. As I swung her door wide open, there she was, sleeping soundly and sweetly, and I was confused. I heard another loud bang and had this sort of eerie feeling that something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what. I grabbed my car key fob and took it downstairs as I nervously inspected the first floor. I swore to myself that if I heard one more sound, I would press that alarm just in case, but I didn't. It was silent after that. I returned to bed and took a while to fall asleep again, but soon shut my eyes. The next day went on like any other day when I noticed a friend of mine had repeatedly called me in the afternoon, and I picked up my daughter from preschool and called the friend back. "Did you hear?" he said. "No, what?" "News outlets were mobbing your street about an hour ago and the news trucks were even in your driveway." And I sat silent, confused. "3 men broke into your neighbor's place last night, tied him up at gunpoint, and stole thousands of dollars worth of items, and took off with his car." I immediately fell to my knees and began sobbing. I had heard it all happen, and I almost pressed the button. But I didn't. I sobbed and felt completely unsafe. I asked a friend to come over for the night to stay with us, and it wasn't until the next day that I got the chance to speak to Ben. Ben explained the whole story and told me the cops wanted to talk to me so I could share what I had heard and experienced. He said the men smashed the window in his basement and entered through there, the sounds that I heard before going to bed. Apparently the timeline suggested that they saw my light and me peering out of the window and waited 30 minutes or so until my light was out to enter the premises. They didn't realize that he was home, and since he had gone to bed early that night, it was suggested that they cased his place beforehand. He had been asleep when one of them started rummaging through his things upstairs in his bedroom, which was directly on the other side of my closets, separated by a shared wall. The sounds and vibrations I heard were apparently the intruder knocking him down after realizing Ben was there. The intruder cupped Ben's mouth, threatening to kill him if he made another sound. And this explains why I heard nothing further while I was investigating afterwards. After they tied him up, he remained restrained for over 12 hours and eventually broke free before calling the police. I broke down and apologized to Ben profusely, explaining what I had heard. He simply replied that while he was tied up, all he could think about was how glad he was that it didn't happen to me and my little girl. I honestly don't know how I would have coped if my daughter and I had experienced that level of trauma firsthand. Ben seemed to be okay, considering everything, but it took me a long time to feel safe again and to let go of the guilt. They never caught the men, and I ended up ordering a taser, which is illegal, and some mace. And for the first time, I even considered getting a gun, but I decided against it. Thankfully, I haven't experienced anything close to that since, and sincerely hope I never do. I'm glad Ben was ultimately okay, but next time, I'll listen to my instincts. This happened fairly recently. I was trying to get a train to the city for a night of drinking with some friends. Unfortunately, the trains weren't running to the city center that day for some reason, so they had a replacement bus service instead. And so off I toddled looking for where they'd hidden the replacement buses in the train station. After a while, it seemed like I was on the right track, and just as I'd found a very promising corridor, I heard running footsteps coming from behind me. I glanced round to find an Arabic man sprinting to a stop beside me. I know he was Arabic because he tried to offer to teach me Arabic while I was trapped with him later on. He asked me if I knew where the replacement bus service was. I replied that I was probably just as lost as he was and that I was just trying to find it myself. I thought that that would be the end of our interaction, but he continued walking beside me. Fair enough, I thought. We're both looking for the same thing, so maybe he thinks we stand a better chance of finding it together. I wish I'd turned around and darted into the bathroom or something. And it turned out that the corridor did lead to the replacement bus, and the driver was standing outside the doors. He assured us that we had plenty of time and were the first ones here. He opened the doors to let us in, and the bus was completely empty. I decided to take a random seat in the middle and huddled up next to the window, ready to put my headphones on. But where does this guy choose to sit in the completely empty bus? Right next to me, trapping me in the row of seats. I thought it was a little weird at the time, but figured no harm would come of it. He asked me why I'm headed to the city center. I tell him I'm meeting friends there for a girls' night out, and then very pointedly put my headphones on and start finding a good song to listen to. He insists that he could join us, and I tell him it's girls only and I don't really know him. He answered that we could get to know each other and he'll buy me a drink. I tell him no thanks, I just want to see my friends today. The bus has gotten moving at this point and there are a few others on board, and from there he proceeds to badger me with questions, all of which I ignore or give one-word answers to. After a bunch of them, my replies become variations of, I just want to listen to my music now, and I'm not interested in talking, sorry. He starts complimenting my body, telling me he thinks I'm beautiful and repeating over and over, I really like you. My only responses now are, leave me alone, every so often, and I'm visibly shrinking away from him as he's leaning closer. The bus driver doesn't seem to know where he's going for his next stop, and the city center is ages away. I'm trapped in the seat and starting to really panic. He starts stepping up to I love yous and leans right up to me, making kissy sounds with his lips. And that was the moment my hero intervened. It was a man around my age sitting a few seats back, and I'll quote what I can remember of the conversation. Hey, excuse me, mate. She asked you multiple times to leave her alone. And through very gritted teeth, that creep tells him to F off. Hey, you need to move away from her. You're clearly bothering her. Do you mind your business? We're fine. And then to me, do you want him to move? and me practically pinned against the window, getting scared. "Yeah." And the creep gets up and storms up to the man. "Do you want to fight? Do you want to go right now?" "Nah, I'd rather you control yourself and leave her alone." The creep is visibly ready to start throwing punches when the driver calls back if there's a problem and if he needs to kick anyone off the bus. The creep quietly says no and moves a few seats behind my hero, much to my relief, and I mouth several thank yous to my hero, who just smiles like it was no big deal. The creep tries following me off the bus, but my friends meet with me, and so he walks off. But I'm just so glad that my hero intervened when he did. This isn't something I would normally post, and I hope I don't regret it somehow. I saw someone briefly mention this subreddit in a YouTube video and thought that it would be the perfect place to share a story of a horrific thing that happened to me, a story I've never told anyone. I'm not sure if anyone will see this, but I'm sharing this in hopes that it will inspire someone to stay safe, safer than I was. I'm not sure if trigger warnings are needed or suggested here, but just out of consideration of others, I'd like to warn everyone that I will be briefly mentioning assault with as little details as possible. 1 year ago, around this time, I was bored and scrolling the web, nothing unusual for me, when I decided to go on Omegle. Omegle was a now shut down website that allowed you to talk to strangers via video or text chat. It was around for a long time, and I used it frequently when I was younger as a time waster. There were plenty of creeps on there, sure, but I've had an equal amount of pleasant interactions and conversations on the site. On Omegle, you could type in tags, basically keywords that describe the type of conversation or person you're looking for, and you would match someone with the same ones. I always used alt for alternative. I feel like it weeded out a lot of rude people and connected me to more people my age, and for reference, I was 19 at the time. I connected with someone who called himself Kane, and we started chatting via text. He said he was 23, and I said my age back. We exchanged some small talk, and before I knew it, we were talking all night. And I mean all night. We lived in the same time zone, and I had stayed up until 6 a.m. chatting about philosophy and life and our interests, just because he was entertaining and I was having fun. When we were talking about our general areas that we live in, he said abruptly, "We should meet up sometime." I laughed, but it turns out that he was very serious, and it turns out we only lived about 3 to 4 hours away from each other, so he was actually considering this. I'm an anxiety-ridden person, but for whatever reason, I thought that this might be a normal thing due to the fact that I just spent hours and hours talking to him and I didn't pick up on any red flags. I said sure, why the hell not? I know, this is incredibly stupid of a mistake to make, and I have a big heart though and frequently make the mistake of giving others the benefit of the doubt. And so just like that, we started planning a camping trip. He was set on doing it just days after that morning because that was when he was off of work next. I agreed because I didn't have anything to do at the time. I asked for his number so we could talk somewhere else other than Omegle about the trip, and he gave it to me. I texted and noticed the messages showed green on my phone, and this indicated that he was using a Samsung or Android phone. And teasingly, I said something along the lines of, "What's up with the Samsung?" And after a few minutes, he texted back saying that he had 2 phones and that one was for work. And that was the first red flag that kind of went off in my head. Why would he need 2 phones for work at his age? I mean, of course, there's possible reasons, but it just set off that sort of intuitive feeling, you know, one that I regret not listening to. I asked what his job was, and he said that he worked for the state. He added that he really isn't allowed to share details about his job because he signed papers saying that he wouldn't, and that he could get fired if he were to violate this agreement. I was still wary of this, but I just figured that he worked for a police station or the town council or something to do with law enforcement, and that I was probably overthinking it. Days passed, and the date for our camping trip approached quickly. He wanted to take me someplace to where he lives, Nimham Mountain in New York. Don't worry, this isn't near my house at all, and I don't really care about violating his fake privacy after what he took from me. Obviously, I wanted to do at least a little research about where I was going, so I popped the name into Google, and a bunch of results popped up about the soil on Nimham Mountain being contaminated with arsenic due to the old mines in the area. All of the government and state articles that I read said that it was still safe to hike there and that you should just wash your skin and shoes after hiking. I still had a feeling of unease about the whole thing, though, and I texted Kane and asked him why we were going to some place that could potentially be dangerous. And he assured me that nothing would happen and said he chose the spot because it's somewhere him and his friends frequently camped. And this slightly reassured me. He does know the area better than me, after all. My parents are definitely over-suspicious of everyone. Strict is also a safe word, and for good reason, though. They're just protective. I told them that I was meeting up with a friend that I met over a video game, and that I've already known him for a month. I knew this would be less likely to freak them out than the truth. They were adamant that this was a horrible idea, but finally let me go off when Kane pulled into my driveway. He didn't come inside and waited outside of his car for me. After a brief introduction, my mom rushed out to meet him and asked a few questions about the area we were headed to, and then we were off. We pulled into the Starbucks by my house so he could get coffee, since he was tired from the drive up, and we sat in his car for about an hour and a half afterwards. And during that time, he asked me to rate the playlist that he put on and showed me how he writes down every single song he likes in a little notebook that he kept in his car. And I thought it was weird but kind of sweet. Like what guys these days write down songs, you know? And after an hour or so passed, I told him that we should be going and we can get to the campsite before dark. He kept saying just 5 more minutes. And after about 30 minutes of insisting we need to leave to make it on time, he finally lets us start onto the road. And while we drove the 4 hours to our destination, Kane mostly talked about himself. He told me long stories about his friends and a girl that he used to date that he doesn't like, and I thought this was strange. Who talks about another woman to a girl like this? And after telling stories for about 2 hours, I tried to deviate to a brighter topic and ask what kinds of things he's into, hobby-wise. I already knew the stuff that he told me online, but I was trying not to suffer from awkward silence or any more of his weird ramblings. He said that he thinks that eating healthy is important, and that people who eat junk food are stupid. He also says he only wears sustainable clothing that's made from cotton or wool. I don't have a problem with being sustainable or whatever, but he was saying it in a really obnoxious way. And then he turned to me and asked the first questions about me since we got in the car. What brought you to Omegle? And I told him that I was bored, and that I like meeting new and interesting people, and that was about it. And he nodded slowly in thought and grinned, showing the most expression I've seen on his face so far. He said he likes to go on Omegle and tell people that he's a soldier in Russia, and that he was torturing people as he spoke to them. And I sat there in silence and kind of just stared at him, waiting for him to say that he was just kidding and that he was just some messed up type of humor, I guess. But he didn't. He just laughed and said, "What?" As we neared the campsite, I mentioned that I was getting kind of hungry. He said that we can stop at Whole Foods before going to camp for the night, and in my head I sighed about this, knowing that he was probably going to judge me for whatever I picked out there, but it wasn't a problem for me. I was hungry, so I agreed. And in Whole Foods, he made me pay for both of our meals because his card wouldn't work there. He didn't even try, it seemed like, and this kind of annoyed me, but I was just eager to get to the campsite, so I paid and we sat down outside to eat. After about an hour, we were finally ready to get to camp. We drive up the mountain and he pulls into a small parking area with about 3 spots. Cars were parked there, and older men were surrounding the cars smoking weed. Nothing that they were doing was wrong, at least morally to me, but it just made me uncomfortable that we were there so late at night. And before I could even mention it, Kane says that it's too cold for him to carry our supplies to the campsite, which was about a 10-minute walk, and set up camp. And I was taken aback by this. I said, "What do you mean? I'll help you. We didn't come up here for nothing, right?" And he insisted and told me to get out of the car, to feel how cold it was. He said it would take a while to pitch our tent and that it was too much for us. There was no way that I was getting out of the car and facing the men in the parking spot next to us, so I rolled down the window halfway and stuck my hand out. It was freezing. He was right about that. That night it was in the 30s and the wind chill felt worse being higher up. I was annoyed, but I agreed to sleep in his car for the night, and I was sad that our trip was basically wasted. He sat in silence for a while, seemingly uncomfortable that I was annoyed and unsure how to comfort me. I slinked back into the passenger seat and started to scroll on social media, just trying to pass the time. He grabbed my phone out of my hand and said, "Come here," and he patted on his lap. I was already annoyed at the situation and confused on what he thought he was doing. I said, "You're funny," and reached for my phone that he had tossed onto the floor of the car, and before I could get to it, he reached over and scooped me up out of the seat and tossed me onto the back seats. He then proceeds to do terrible things to me. I don't remember most of it. My eyes were squeezed shut and I was praying for it just to end. But after he was done, he pushed me back into the seats and got dressed, and he smiled at me and said, "How was it?" And I just stared back at him with tears in my eyes, and he climbed back into the front seat, propped his feet up on the wheel, and went to sleep. I didn't know what to do. I sat there motionless in the back seat for about 2 hours trying to process what had just happened to me. I considered calling my mom, calling 911, and I thought about it for what felt like forever. I had already been assaulted once in my life, and it broke my parents' hearts. I knew that learning of this would absolutely destroy them, and I was also afraid of what would happen if I told them. I didn't want my dad or brother to go to jail for life because they were angry and got revenge against this guy, and I just sat there all night, watching the men outside stare into the car and smoke their joints. I don't remember falling asleep, but I eventually woke up to wind hitting the car, and I was in a fetal position sitting upright holding my legs with my arms. Kane noticed that I was awake and said it was time to go. I was so scared of him. It felt like my heart was leaping out of my throat. Adrenaline was pumping through my body, and I started scanning the back seat of our overnight bags for something I could use as a weapon in case he were to come at me again. And I ended up holding onto my full metal water bottle. It wasn't deadly by any means, but it could knock someone out, and holding it made me feel a little bit safer. I stayed in the back and Kane started driving. I asked where we were going and he said, "To get breakfast," almost as if that was obvious and it was silly of me to ask. After driving down the mountain back into the city, we pull into a parking garage and he tells me to get out, that we were here. I get out of the car and cling close to it, not wanting to let him get behind me. I was thinking about making a run for it, but didn't want to risk getting chased and overpowered by him. I followed him to a little Mexican spot on the corner, and he told me to order pancakes so he could have some. And this obviously made me more pissed than I already was, but I didn't say anything because I was afraid that there would be consequences if I showed negative emotions at this point. I ate a few bites of my food, and he happily ate the rest off my plate. He paid quickly with cash and took me back to the car, where he lay down in the back seat. He says he was going to take a nap because he didn't sleep well last night, and I didn't want to argue with him, so I just let him sleep. How could he sleep so soundly after what he had done to me, though? I asked. He slept for about 3 hours, and the whole time I was watching YouTube videos trying to calm myself down and keep a clear head. It was around 9 a.m., and around this time my mom was waking up and texted me saying that she wants me to be home. I told her that Kane was taking a nap and that I would be home soon, and she didn't like the sound of that and insisted that I come home now. I was happy to have a reason to just get out of there, one that might be actually convincing to Kane. And I woke him up and he became angry with me, saying, "Hey, don't wake me up next time. Play on your phone. Just watch TikTok or something." I was shaking, but I managed to say that my mom wanted me home and that we needed to go. He said to let him sleep for 30 minutes more and told me to set a timer on my phone, so I did. 30 minutes felt like 30 hours, and once it went off, I woke him once again, and this time, I filmed myself waking him up because I was afraid what was going to happen. He was angry once again, and I told him that 30 minutes was up. I asked to leave, begged him to leave, and he said no. Over and over, he said we aren't leaving yet. I was shaking uncontrollably, but put on a brave face and pretended like I was being playful, and I said, Okay, well, I guess I'll just get an Uber then. I turned around and started to open the car door when I felt his hand grab my shoulder, digging into it, and yank me back into place. I honestly think I blacked out from fear for a few seconds there, and he says, "Where do you think you're going?" And his hand was still on my shoulder, his fingers squeezing into my skin. My mind was racing and I was on the verge of tears, and this caught his eye, and I quickly played it off by saying my mom would call the police to come get me if I wasn't home soon. I had mentioned earlier that my dad works in law enforcement, so this was a little bit more believable of a lie, and at the mention of police, something changed in his face, and he started to look frantic. He let go of me and happily agreed to drive me home, and I felt a deep sense of relief, the deepest relief I've ever felt, and swallowed the lump in my throat as he climbed into the front seat and started our 5-hour drive back to my house. The drive back was much quieter than the drive up. I didn't say anything unless he initiated. I just gripped my phone in my hand and tried not to make eye contact with him. I wondered if he had any remorse for what he did in those moments. And when we reached the town where I live, it was about 11:30 at night. Kane pulled onto the main strip to get to my house, and I saw flashing lights behind me. And my first instinct was to be scared because my dad is a cop, so I've always made extra sure not to break any traffic laws. The police pulled us over, and 2 men stepped out of the cop car. I frantically rolled down my window so they could see my familiar face, the daughter of their boss, and one of them greeted me, and both looked concerned and disappointed that I was in the car with someone getting pulled over. The other cop told Kane to get out of the car while I explained what we were doing out so late. I spared the illegal and horrific details. I was tired and scared, and I needed to be safe in my own home. I also didn't want them waking up my sleeping dad with such bad news. I overheard the second officer ask Kane about his info when he said, "What's your name, son?" Kane mumbled, and he said to speak up. The name he gave was not Kane, and he told the officer that he was 22, not 23. And my heart sank into my feet, and I sat motionless while they explained to Kane that he missed a stop sign and that they're just letting him off with a warning. They told me to get home, and I nodded my head. When we pulled off, I let my emotions take over and started screaming at this stranger that I was sitting next to. "Why did you lie to me? What is wrong with you?" He looked distressed from the volume of my yelling, and he told me to calm down, that he was sorry he lied. He said that he only lied about his identity for his own safety. And that honestly baffled me, considering that he had just assaulted me. And I screamed at him all the way to my house as we pulled in, and I threw the car doors open and started throwing my stuff out into the lawn, desperate to just get far away from him. He tried to talk to me, to offer more pitiful excuses for his disgusting actions, but I screamed at him to get away from me and that I never wanted to see him again. I gathered my stuff off the lawn and hauled it into my room while my parents slept soundly, unaware of the terrible secret that I now had. I woke my mom up and told her that I was home, as she requested. And once I got to my room, I just broke down. What happened to me was starting to sink in. As I was sobbing silently into my blanket, my phone lit up from a text saying Kane, and it read, "I'm sorry about what happened. I really am. If it makes you feel any better, I just got pulled over, so that's my karma, I guess. Let me know if you want to talk." And I felt a wave of nausea hit me like a train. I screenshotted the message, blocked his number, and deleted his contact. And I haven't heard from him since, and I haven't hung out with anyone since besides my boyfriend, who, thank God, I met later and is normal. I still think about what happened almost every day, and I still feel sick when someone I don't know gets close to me, even if it's just a stranger passing by in the grocery store. I know that what happened was the product of my own irrational teenage actions. I know I shouldn't have met up with someone I didn't know, but I had faith that he would be a normal person, somewhat at least. I just wish that I would have listened to my instincts and my parents' warnings. I don't know what would happen if I didn't make up that police story, and I don't even want to think about it, and I will never meet up with someone I don't know again. And while trying to cope with what had happened to me, I googled Nimham Mountain again, and I found a link that said Kane Mountain North Trail Loop, New York. And if you made it thus far, or you take anything away from this story, please let it be this. Trust your instincts and trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. This happened a few hours ago, and I'm not scared anymore, just angry my pizza got stolen. In my town, there's a story that a guy has moved into the deep woods close to our town. I never believed it, as I go for night drives occasionally and never saw him or anything resembling a man that lives in the woods. Anyway, tonight I decided to go for a drive and drove past a pizza place, and being hungry, I decided to get a pizza before I went home. In my head, I had a plan to eat pizza and play some Minecraft, as I'm in my 2-week Minecraft phase at the moment. I paid for my pizza and started walking to my car with the pizza in one hand and my phone in the other, messaging my friend if he wants to play some Minecraft when I get home. I look up from my phone to cross the road to the car park, and I see something under my car. It looks like a shadow or something dark. I put my phone in my pocket and pull out my keys, unlock the car to scare off anything close to the car, and I was thinking it may be a cat or a dog just hanging around my car. But when I unlock the car, nothing happens. No cat running away, and nothing running away. The shadow looked like it was cast from the driver's side, so I was going to have to look at what it was, whether I wanted to or not, to get in. I put my keys away and pull out my phone again and turn the flashlight on to see better in the dark. As I turn towards the driver's side of my car, I see him. A dirty, naked guy with big eyes staring right at me. He was crouched down, trying to hide from me. Now, I don't usually get scared of anything, but this guy terrified me. It looked like he rolled around in mud and it dried out on his skin, and his eyes looked creepy, bloodshot and kind of bulging out of his head. And of course, he was naked. I get startled and jump backwards out of instinct, dropping my pizza in the process. It falls out of its box and onto the floor. I start moving back slowly and shout at him to get out of my car. He looks up at me, then at the pizza, then back at me. He tilts his head to one side and then jumps towards the pizza like a dog, grabs it and starts running away down the road, and I assume he ran all the way to those woods. I wouldn't know where he went, as I didn't feel like following him. I lock my car and run back to the pizza place to stay there for a bit. The workers obviously don't believe me when I tell them what had just happened, but I know what I saw. And once the fear subsides after a while, I realize that this guy just stole my pizza. Angry as I was looking forward to it, I decided to get another one and run to my car this time. I get in, put the pizza on the passenger seat, and go home. Once I got home, I locked all my doors and windows, and I even locked my bedroom door, as I feel a little scared still. And I think I'll be playing Minecraft until the sun comes up. This happened like 6 to 7 years ago. I played soccer for 1 year in community college after high school, and I knew this guy because he worked for the athletics department and he was another student. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I had a 1-hour gap between classes. And this guy noticed me in the library and asked what I was doing there, and I told him I had an hour-long gap, and he started coming regularly to hang out. I didn't mind because he seemed like a normal guy. He wasn't waiting for anything, but he just wanted to hang out. He brought me little gifts a few times, like chocolate and stuff, and he was being a little too sweet for someone I barely knew, and I really didn't think about red flags. With the gifts, I remember he always downplayed it. He would say something like, they had extra Kit Kat bars today in the office. Do you want some? And he never said that he purposely bought Kit Kat for me. I know a lot more about boys now than I knew back then, and I think that he knew that buying me gifts would be too much, but he still wanted to do it without doing it, I guess. The soccer season for us ended before Thanksgiving. The only teams that kept playing after that were going to the playoffs, not us. After Thanksgiving, we had finals. In that brief period after the soccer season and before Thanksgiving, he asked me about my classes for second semester. To be honest, I hadn't been super organized with course registration, and I honestly didn't know. Also, the counselors were completely clueless. I didn't tell him that, but I remember saying that I didn't want to have another gap hour like this because it wasted so much time, and I don't think he was happy to hear that. He also asked if I would play another season, and I said no to that. I needed to manage my time better, and playing soccer every day was not helping. I think my mistake was that I just said too much and was kind of unfiltered, and I used to do that a lot back then, saying too much without thinking about how it affected other people's feelings. And that was on the last Thursday before Thanksgiving, so no more hour gaps to hang out anymore. We had Thanksgiving break, we took finals, and we had winter breaks, and everything was great. Winter break was when the real problem started, though. In the mornings, this guy literally showed up outside my house while sitting in his car. The first time I didn't believe it was actually him. The second time, I checked, and it was. And by then, it was really clear that we both knew what was going on. He was stalking me. And that wasn't all. I posted on my Instagram stories sometimes about the places that I was at, and this guy literally showed up there several times, like girly stores at the mall where he had zero business being. He did lots of things like that, and he also started pointing his phone at me like he was taking pictures, and that was even weirder. I basically stopped using social media over this. After winter break, this continued, and when my parents were at work, this guy came during the afternoon too. I called the cops a few times, and they went and tried to talk to him, and he basically told them that he wasn't going to talk, and that was it. I think the cops wanted to help, but they could never do anything about it because he was careful not to break any laws. Like, he didn't trespass, he didn't make any threats, and he didn't show weapons. I have no idea what he's doing now. My guess is that he eventually gave up. Maybe his little obsession kind of became old and he found other things to pay more attention to. At least I hope so. But if he still comes by, I have no idea. I think the most frightening challenge in all of this is that I couldn't tell my parents since I knew that they would completely freak out. This happened 4 years back. It was the middle of winter and the night was unseasonably warm without a hint of snow on the ground. I left my apartment around 8 p.m. to go for my daily walk. I worked nights and my schedule was screwed up, hence the 8 p.m. walk, figuring I would cross the bridge into the city nearby. For further context, I'm a very tall guy who's fairly athletic, and I was in my late 20s at the time. I'd rarely had a problem walking at night, and at the time I felt safe doing so. I put on my headphones and headed towards the bridge. The first 20 minutes were uneventful. I passed by old houses, a subpar Mexican restaurant, a really good Mexican restaurant, a sketchy gas station, some newly built upscale apartments, and finally, I was at the river, enjoying the view of the bright lights over the dark flowing water, not yet frozen. I crossed the bridge into the city and hit a crosswalk button at a four-way intersection, and then noticed someone standing on the corner opposite, the only other soul I'd seen outside that night. Seemingly, she was doing nothing, and I assumed that she was waiting for an Uber to come pick her up, since she didn't seem to be waiting for the light to change. The street, ordinarily busy during the daytime, was completely silent. The light changed, and I crossed, headed in her direction. As I neared her, I noticed that she would cast glances in my direction and then look away, almost sheepishly. And she did this multiple times, and I figured that she was maybe unnerved by me. And I sympathized, figuring that it must have made her uneasy, us being the only two people on a very dimly lit street. As I passed by, I took in her outfit, mostly because I thought she looked cold, and she wore a knitted hat with tassels, a sweater that looked too thin for the winter, tight jeans, and a little plastic children's backpack on her back. I thought that maybe she was in her teens at first, but upon closer inspection she appeared to be in her late 20s or 30s. She had short cropped, light brown hair and a pale complexion. She was skinny and was of average height. I was maybe a head taller than her, and I walked by and continued down the street. I passed by high-rise hotels on my right and left and made my way into a central park. During peak hours, this place would be packed with tourists and locals alike, but that day, at an odd hour with the pandemic in full swing, I felt like the only man in the city. I admired the brilliant display of lighted trees as I crossed through the center of the park. Then, figuring I was at a good halfway point in my journey, I made my way around an old marble and stone library back towards the bridge. As I turned the corner of the library back onto the street from which I'd come, I'd nearly collided with someone moving towards me. It was the same woman I'd seen not 10 minutes earlier. My noise-canceling headphones were still on, so I pulled down on one side and said something by way of apology. She said nothing in return. Instead, she stepped back from me and stood below a streetlight, not making eye contact. She stole tiny glances at me, that same tick that I'd noticed before, and I put my headphones back on and nodded goodnight and headed towards the nearest crosswalk. Reason told me that she must be headed in the direction I'd come from, since we'd nearly run into each other headed opposite ways, but some part of me whispered that she wasn't headed that way. And sure enough, when I turned to look, she was trailing closer behind me, her strides surprisingly long and energetic, and I found this odd that I continued to watch her out of the corner of my eye. Shortly after I reached the crosswalk, as I stood there waiting for the light to change, she caught up with me, passed me by, and stopped. A car went past, and as it did so, she squatted over her plastic bag a few meters from me, rifling frantically for something, looking up at me on occasion. I hit a button on my headphones, stopping my podcast so that I could hear her better. And what I found disturbing about the motion of her looking through her bag is that it struck me as fake, as though she were pretending for some reason. She was barely looking inside, and her careless motions struck me more like bad acting, and something about her motions, the way she kept looking at me, it all felt wrong. The light changed, and I began to walk quickly, but she was faster. She stood suddenly, darting past me towards the museum, swinging the half-open little pink backpack over her shoulder, and I watched her silhouette disappear into the darkness beyond the reach of the streetlights. I hoped that that was the end of that, and after a few beats of not seeing her, I let my guard fall a little, restarting my podcast. Beyond the museum was a patch of poorly lit sidewalk in front of a squat building with mirror-like windows. I wasn't far from the bridge now. As I made my way back there, I turned my head to look at the reflections of buildings and streetlights in the windows, and to my horror, a dark figure sprinted silently towards my reflection, dreamlike. I'm not sure why, maybe out of sheer confusion, but I turned to meet her as she hurtled towards me. Perhaps surprised by my sudden turn, she halted mere feet from me, staring. Her eyes were wide and looked frantic, wild, and she kept looking at my arms and then back at my face as though sizing me up. My accidental bluff had worked, and in the darkness, I suppose I must have looked more prepared to fight back than I felt. She gripped something small tightly in one hand, though she held it off to the side, and in the shadow of the building I couldn't see what it was. Seconds dragged as we stood there, staring at one another. Immobilized by fear and confusion, I waited for her to make some move, to attempt to use whatever object that she held in her hand. Just then, to my enormous relief, a car trundled slowly past. A bit of my strength returned, and over my blaring podcast I felt, more than heard, myself shouting at her, "What do you want?" And there was no reply. I slowly backed away from her, expecting her to move, and she just watched me, that same intense look on her face. I took another step back, and then another, and steadily backing away from her until I felt confident enough to turn and carefully walk away. As I reached a better lit area, I began to move faster, all the while keeping my eyes trained on her shadowy form. She stood there for some time, statuesque. Then abruptly, having spontaneously abandoned whatever plan that she may have had for me, she turned from me and, without looking for traffic, she crossed the street with long strides and disappeared around the corner of a building. Something about the casual air of it disturbed me greatly. I kept my eyes trained behind me on my walk home, afraid that she would follow me. The bridge was well lit, and I saw no signs of her. And knowing that this was the only way for her to follow me and keep up on foot, I breathed a sigh of relief. I saw no more cars headed from the city and no more pedestrians out walking. Nothing happened after that. I'm not sure why, but I didn't call the cops that night. I still regret not having called despite my roommates insisting that I do so. I just remember thinking that I wasn't sure what to say to the cops, that I hadn't really been attacked, that they wouldn't be able to find her anyway, and I made up excuses. I suppose I must have been in shock, in denial at having been nearly ambushed, especially by someone smaller than me, in my own city, so close to my apartment. And one of my roommates called the cops for me, and a cop drove through the area, but by that point, she was gone. Before I get into what happened, sorry for the storytelling. I've just never been a great writer, and that being said, last night my friends and I went to the movies in hopes of watching Joker 2. We hadn't bought the tickets online, and unfortunately we got there just after the doors closed, but because we were already there, we decided to see what else was playing within the hour and decided on the Terrifier 3. None of us had heard of the Terrifier before, but it sounded interesting enough. However, soon after the movie started, I immediately felt my stomach drop. About 5 months ago, I went on a run at a park my aunt recommended to me. She told me how it had a great trail, and because it was finally getting warm, I decided to go even though it was out of the way from where I live. As I entered the parking lot, I began to feel excited because I understood why she raved about it. Although it wasn't the biggest, there was a clearing with picnic benches, gazebos, and a cute playground full of kids. However, it was surrounded by a big forest, which was where the trail was located. About 15 minutes or so into my run, my headphones' battery was getting low, so I paused to put them in my pouch. As I was taking them off, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye and turned to look into the trees. Peering into the forest, I saw a clown standing beside an old beige Toyota while holding a balloon bouquet. We made eye contact for what felt like an eternity, and I immediately turned around and ran back toward the parking lot without so much as a second thought. The scene always set off alarm bells, as I've always been a huge true crime nerd, and I cannot even begin to describe how terrified I felt in that moment. By the time I got in my car, my lungs were burning, and it felt like my heart was going to leap out of my throat. But as I turned on the ignition, I realized that the big group of kids were celebrating a birthday in the gazebo. And I had never felt so relieved. It was clear that the clown was meant for their party, what with his balloons and costume, and I laughed to myself even though I was still on edge and silently drove home feeling like an idiot. I had forgotten about the incident up until last night. When I saw the clown in the movie's costume, I felt sick. The man I saw in the forest was wearing that same outfit. I don't know for sure whether this character's costume is unique to the movie or not, but after trying to look up similar costumes, I'm fairly certain it is. Everything was the same, even down to the stupid little hat. And I'm freaking out and don't know what any of it means. If I did come across some guy dressed as a fictional clown killer, why were they wearing it? And why in the empty part of an old park? A big part of me hopes that it was just some sort of twisted prank, but if that were the case, why wouldn't he go somewhere where he knew people would see him? And after watching the movie, I wouldn't be surprised if there were sick freaks out there who morbidly idolized Art the Clown. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over email at letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, justice for Peanut.